The cinematic event of the year with Madam Web is now out playing in theaters.
You serious?
And I say that with all of the sarcasm in the world. Now look, there's that cliche thing that YouTube reviewers always like to say. When you go into a movie, you leave your expectations at the door, and you go in wanting it and hoping that it'll be good. And look, for 99% of the time, I agree with that. That's probably true. In this instance, I went into Madam Web knowing it was going to be bad. My question was, how bad is this movie actually going to be? Especially when you got Rotten Tomatoes scores as low as they are.
This is the worst!
This was at the bottom of the barrel of expectations. And with those expectations in check, I will say that Madam Web did come above them just a tiny bit. Now, don't get me wrong, this movie is bad, and I will go on to tell you why I think that it's bad in a minute, but just touching upon some of the stuff that I did kind of like about Madam Web, I think the first thing I'll mention is the girls that play the teenagers that Dakota Johnson's Madam Web is trying to save from the bad guy in this movie. Now, I say it kind of worked for me because for the majority of the movie, I found these characters just very annoying. They're constantly bickering with each other, which kind of works for the scenario that they're put into, but their banter never really becomes that much fun. Their bond never really becomes that much fun until you get to like the later part of the, like basically to the end of the movie. I was kind of getting on board with them by the end of the movie. The chemistry between them started to get a little bit better. Other than that, though, I did not care whether or not these characters were saved by the end or killed off by the end. Couldn't care less. Another thing that kind of works about this movie is the premise, because as much fun as it is to say, what was Sony doing greenlighting a Madam Web movie? When you watch the movie and you think back to what the pitch of this could have been, Terminator, where you replace the Terminator with a Spider-Man or a Spider-Man-like figure, there is something that's kind of intriguing about that idea, and the movie, you can see it through all of the crap and the poor, terrible dialogue and execution of the whole thing. It could have been a cool story, and I'm someone who likes a cat and mouse kind of chase story anyways, so if you're going to have that in there, I'm kind of a sucker for it, so I kind of enjoyed that aspect of the movie as well. Well, that's it. Yeah, that's where my positives are going to lie and die, because Madam Web is a web of a mess. Let's start with Dakota Johnson. Now look, Dakota Johnson, she's a good actress, so I'm told. I've never really been the biggest fan of her. I also haven't seen a lot of her stuff, but in this movie, it's not great to put on her resume because she is quite terrible in this movie. And she's terrible in all the ways that an actor could be terrible. When you watch her on screen, she feels like she is dead behind the eyes. She feels like she does not want to be here. She feels like she does not believe in the material, to the point that there are times, many times in fact, in this movie, where Dakota Johnson doesn't take time to try and find a line reading. She doesn't find time to, how would my character say this? What's the situation in which she's saying this in? She just steamrolls over every line of dialogue. She feels like she wants to get this atrocity out of her mouth as fast as she can so it can get away from her forever and she can move on to the next scene until this movie finally wraps up. In that way, she is a terrible protagonist to watch. Not just because Dakota Johnson is playing her so poorly and is so uninterested in her performance that why am I interested in the performance she's given, but the character herself is pretty unlikable. She doesn't want to be here in the situation. She never really has that hero's journey to the point that it feels satisfying. In fact, her origin story as Madam Web is so poorly explained. Her powers, how they manifest, what exactly her powers are, not exactly the clearest in the movie, to the point that I honestly think that Madam Web has one of the worst origin stories I've ever seen told in a comic book movie. On top of that, we've got the villain of Madam Web. Now, as mentioned before, the Spider-Man-like figure who's trying to get these teenage girls because he believes that in the future they're going to become Spider-Woman and kill him. So he's trying to stop that from happening while he still can. And when I say that this villain is one of the worst, most boring, most incompetent villains I have ever seen in a comic book movie, that may be underselling it. This guy spouts out nothing but exposition the entire movie. Every single person he meets, he explains his evil plan to. His dialogue is almost exclusively, I cannot let these girls exist. They must not be here. He never goes beyond that. He just wants to get rid of these girls because they might murder him. Murder him for what? What is he going to be doing? What does he do? The movie never tells us what this guy really does, what his plan is once he has gotten rid of his eventual foes. What is his plan to do? And it just doesn't really explore that. I have no idea what the villain really wants in this movie, what he's trying to accomplish aside from delaying his eventual demise. And the actor for this movie, I really don't want to hate on him too much, but he was really, really bad in this movie. And like 95% of his whole performance is ADR. It's additional recorded dialogue. Half the time he's speaking off screen, and the few times that he is speaking on screen, his mouth never matches what he's saying, nor does it even feel like he could be saying the words as loud as he's saying. He looks like he gives every single line in a whisper. It gets ridiculous to the point that I just didn't believe a single thing this guy was saying was coming out of his mouth in real time. And when you get to the filmmaking aspect of Madam Web, this movie is atrocious in almost every aspect of its storytelling. The editing in this movie was so discombobulating. I hated the way this thing was edited. Things constantly jump in and jump out at random times. The camera will do this thing where it swerves around and then zooms in and out of someone's face during a scene, almost like it's a guy on a reality TV show filming these people in real time. I don't exactly know what the plan was or what the intention was for those shots, but they just felt so out of place to me in this movie. And when it comes to Madam Web using her powers of seeing the future and then reliving that same moment again, in some movies that has been done before, and it's been done in a fun way, like Edge of Tomorrow, that Tom Cruise movie with Emily Blunt, that comes to mind. In this movie, I found it incredibly annoying and nauseating, and the way that they did it felt so disjointed to me. If anything, it pulled me out of the scene more than it was able to put me into the perspective of Dakota Johnson's Madam Web, like I think they were trying to do. But Madam Web is, of course, a comic book superhero movie, so let's talk about that action in this movie. It sucks, and it's almost non-existent. Yeah, this movie is an hour and 56 minutes long. You know, take away credits or whatever. Hour 45. I think there's probably about 8 minutes of action in this movie, maybe. And when you do get it and you think, okay, at least this will be fun, you know, it's shot terribly. It's edited to crap. You can't really tell what's going on. Even the Spider-Man-like stuff that they're trying to do with the action sequences with the villain, it never plays out the way that you feel when you're watching Spider-Man on screen, and it just feels like Walmart Spider-Man. It feels like CW. Know what it feels like? It feels like the CW got their hands to make this knockoff Spider-Man TV series. That is how these action sequences feel. They're not interesting. They're not innovative. They are so forgettable. So the part that you mostly go to these blockbuster comic book movies for is basically non-existent in this comic book movie, to the point where that should tell you everything you need to know about the experience of Madam Web. It is boring, it is poorly acted, it is poorly put together. There are so many teasing references to Peter Parker's Spider-Man thrown into this movie that feel like they have no purpose being here. It just feels like the bait to get the Spider-Man fanboys to come into the theater, and honestly, it feels kind of manipulative. Madam Web is a boring movie with no ambition, with no passion. You can just feel it with everyone behind the camera and in front of the camera. They're just trying to get through this thing. They just want to get to the end of it. And when you're sitting there watching the movie as a viewer, you just want to get to the end of it and get out of that auditorium. Madam Web is probably one of the worst comic book movies I've ever seen in my life. Not the worst. I think movies like Fant Four Stick, even Batman and Robin, and in my opinion, Morbius are worse than this movie is. But it's up there, guys. This is a strong not recommend from me. I did not like this movie very much, and if anything, I just saw it as complete wasted potential. Anyway, guys, those are all my thoughts and opinions on the long-awaited Madam Web. But what did you guys think of Madam Web? Have you had the chance to check it out yet? Comment down below and let me know. And if you're new here and you haven't heard, we have a goal on this channel. We want to hit 4,000 subscribers before the end of the year. So if you like talking about the Sonyverse movies, we talk about those, the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies in general. We talk about all of it very regularly on this channel. You're in the right place if you like that kind of stuff. So consider hitting that subscribe button before you make your way out. We'd love to have you join our little community over here. As always, guys, thank you so much for hearing me out, and I hope to talk to you guys again real soon.